So we're going to talk about data quality services, or DQS, in Module 9 here. And we're going to start by discussing what we mean by data quality. What is this all about? And then we'll talk about using data quality services to both cleanse data and to match data. By cleansing data, we're talking about making sure that our data conforms to normal standards. By matching our data, we're talking about removing duplicate records, finding and dealing with duplicates, or deduplication, that people call it. So what is data quality? Well, let me be sure that we understand what we're not talking about here. We're not really discussing data corruption. It's an important topic. It's just not what we're talking about here. We're talking about data quality in the sense of it's accurate, it's correct, it's conformed to some standards. The example we're going to use here is state names. So making sure that the states are spelled out, California as opposed to CA or CAL or something like that. Making sure that codes, for instance, insurance claim codes, conform to a right standard, those kinds of things. So we're talking about data quality in the sense of making sure it's correct and accurate. The reason we need that, obviously, is because people are making decisions based on that, and your company looks stupid if you're sending out all this kind of wacky record stuff. So DQS is a knowledge-based solution. And what a knowledge base is it's basically a database that stores what things should be like. In other words, it says, it stores information that for the state column, if you see a CAL, I want it converted to California, that kind of a thing. And that's what the knowledge base contains, as well as for deduplication, it contains a set of rules that say, if two records have the following things be the same, then they're duplicate records. So that's what we're talking about with a knowledge base. And DQS, when you install it, and by the way, it is a separate install for SQL Server. Once you've installed it, there's a server component and a client component. We're going to be working with that. And finally, it adds a new SSIS transformation, the DQS transformation. We're also going to take a look at that. So we need to define a couple of terms. A domain. When you deal with DQS, you're going to use the term domain quite a bit. Think of it as a column. Generally speaking, and it's not the same thing, but it's pretty close, a domain and a column are the same. An entity and a row are the same thing. When I say same thing, I shouldn't say that. It's not the same thing, but it's very similar. The concept is the same thing. So a domain would be a set of values, and we would associate that with column. And entity we would think of as a thing, one individual of this group, and we think of that as a row. Then we also have this idea of a referenced data service. This is optional. You can use this or not, but what it is a company or an organization, or often a government, will produce data for you. Sometimes it's free, sometimes you have to pay for it. For instance, if you use the U.S. Postal Service's reference data service, then what you get is a list of zip codes, cities, states, etc., and it's totally free. In general, I haven't seen an exception to this, but in general, if a government or a government agency produces the data, it's probably going to be free. The CIA World Book is a tremendous source of information about nations around the world, whether it's population statistics or GDP or whatever it is. Lots and lots of information about nations around the world. So there are different agencies. The World Health Organization has lots of information about disease and conditions, things like that. So there's a lot of this data that's free. There are also companies that collect data and sell it to you. And what we're going to do with this data is use it as a test against our data to see if our data conforms to their data. And we're basically saying they are an authority. If the Postal Service says that this zip code belongs to this city and our data disagrees with it, we're going to convert our data to match their data. So that's what a reference data service is. How do you get it? There are lots of ways. The way Microsoft would like you to get it is through the Azure Marketplace. And the Azure Marketplace is something they don't make any money off, I don't think anyway. But it's just a hosted location. And think of it like, this Saturday my wife and I are going to go to the farmer's market. So it's just a place where they gather all the farmers together and they sell their produce. Well, same thing here. An Azure Marketplace, all the people or many people who sell data can basically list their services. You go to that service, you find one you like, you connect to it, you give them money if that's necessary, give them a credit card, create an account, do that kind of stuff. And then you connect that data service to one of the domains in your knowledge base. And from then on, their data that you just paid for or got from free is going to be the authoritative definition of what data in that domain should be. We're going to create a knowledge base, and we can create it from scratch, or you can create it based upon an existing one. And then you're going to go through an iterative process of training that knowledge base. You're going to feed it some sample data and see what it comes up with recommendations and changes. And then you'll fine tune that, and then you'll feed it some more. And so the biggest work with DQS is the initial stage where you're training DQS to know about what you find acceptable and what's not acceptable. That's where you'll put in all your work. After that, it's 90%, 95% hands-off once you've got it trained, but you're going to spend a large number of hours. I don't know how many that is, depends upon your data, of course. You're going to spend a large amount of time training your knowledge base so it can learn what is appropriate and what isn't. So let's create a knowledge base. Now, when we're dealing with DQS, there's a client, and the client we're going to use is already set up for us on our bar, in our taskbar. It's right there. So I'm going to select that. The first thing it wants to know is what server are we going to attach to. We're going to attach to MIAC. Now there are three panes here: knowledge base management, data quality projects, and administration. We're not going to look at administration here in this class. It's really straightforward, and I think you can figure that out on your own pretty easily. We're going to begin with knowledge base management, where we create a knowledge base and train it. Once we have it trained, we'll come over to data quality projects and create a project to have it read some actual data and do its thing, cleanse or deduplicate. We're going to do cleansing first, and then we'll come back and do duplication. But for right now, let's just create a knowledge base. So the first thing we want to do is come over here in this pane, the knowledge base management pane, create a new knowledge base. Now we could create it from scratch, or we can base it upon an existing knowledge base if you have one. Obviously the first one you create, you're going to have to create from scratch. It so happens that they have created one for us to use as an example. So we're going to start by creating it from an existing knowledge base. And there's only one. The one that exists is this one called DQS data. And here is what it looks like. It has these domains related to geography, country, region with a 3-letter heading, a 2-letter heading spelled out, states, etc. We're going to create a knowledge base based upon this one. And so I'm going to name it Demo KB, Demo Knowledge Base. And I should put in a little description in here, but I'm horrible at putting in description, so I'll just leave that blank. And notice down here, there are activities: domain management, knowledge discovery, and matching policy. You have to do domain management before you can do any of the others. So let's do that. We're going to select domain management, click next. And here is where we would go through and clean up all of the domains that we're inheriting from that original knowledge base, or create new ones. I'm not going to spend a lot of time doing this. I'll just do one to show you how it works. We're going to take this U.S. state and just change its name to state. That's all I'm going to do. But just to make you aware, you can change the data types. They've got leading values. You can set up the language, do all of this kind of stuff. Here, by the way, is where I would set a reference data. So if I had subscribed to a reference data service, I would have a file, a WSDL file, most likely, and I'd browse, I'd find that, I'd bring it in here, and it would show me my service provider, etc. Then I have domain rules. I don't have any right now. We're going to create some later, but this is where they are. And here are domain values for state. Now this all came from that original knowledge base that we're copying. And what they've done is they've gone through for each of the 50 states in the US, they've said that ALA period and AL period should both be corrected to Alabama. So when it reads the data from my staging data or from my source data, whichever I choose to run this as, it's going to find any domains where it has an AL and just correct it, convert it to the word Alabama spelled out. And it's done that for all 50 states. Okay, now in the real world, as I say, we'd come through and do all of this. We'd clean all these up. We'd add some new ones. We'd fix all this. I'm just going to, I'm sure you can figure out that all on your own. I'm just going to click finish. So we're done. Now, I'm not ready to publish my knowledge base. It wouldn't be harmful if I did. It's just be a waste of time. And I don't want to waste your time, so I'll just say no, because we're going to come back and do more work on that knowledge base. So it's making that change for me. Now we're back here. We're not really going to create a new one. We've already got one. So we want to start training or doing what we call knowledge discovery with that knowledge base. So I'm going to take demo KV, the one we just created, and I'm going to do knowledge discovery. I could go back and do domain management, add more domains and stuff, but we've done enough of that. Now, it's saying what we're doing with knowledge discovery is we're taking some data that exists, some sample data really is the way I think of it, and it's going to learn from that sample data. So the first thing it's asking is, where do I get that data? Well, you could get it from SQL Server, but we're going to get ours from an Excel file. Now, let me show you this Excel file. It's called stores.xls. And this is the one we're going to read from. And let's just take a look at it quickly before we open it up in DQS. It's kind of what you would expect. A store ID, a store name, address, city, state, phone number, and store type. But if I just give a visual look at this, I see some interesting things. First of all, notice there's a store 1 on 1 Main Street in New York, New York with this phone number and this store type. And there's a store ONE with the same exact address, phone number, and store type. I'm thinking they're the same store and there's just a typo here. We also have some of my states spelled out like California and some of them abbreviated, CA. Or WA in Washington, etc. And then finally, I have a store whose type is whale sale. I'm thinking that should be wholesale. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we aren't actually selling whales, but I'm thinking probably that's a typo as well. So that is our data we're going to use for discovery. So I'll browse to that file. I'll make sure we're on the right sheet, worksheet, okay? And now I'm going to map the columns in that spreadsheet to my domains. So we'll start off, and these are all the columns in that spreadsheet. We're going to choose state, and we'll map that to the domain we just fixed, state. Then we're going to choose city. But lo and behold, there is no domain that's equivalent to city, so I'm going to create a new one. So I'm going to create a new domain. We'll call it city. Now you don't have to call the domain the same as the column, but it makes sense, right? It's just logical. And there's no reason not to. We would fill all this stuff out. I'll click OK. Then we're also going to map store type. And once again, there is no domain called store type, so we'll have to add one. Okay. So and we could go on and do the rest of them, we'll just stop with that. What we've got now is My spreadsheet has certain columns, and I've mapped those columns to domains in my knowledge base. Let's go to the next page, and this is the Discover page, and this is where it's going to read that spreadsheet and make some learning happen. All right, so I'm going to click Start. Now, I'll just tell you this once because it'll come up many times. It's way, way easy here to get overexcited and get anxious and start clicking on things. Sit on your hands and be patient until you see this say restart. Anything you do at this point other than wait is going to hurt you. Just wait until you see restart, and that's the visual indication that it's all finished. That could take hours. It might be that you click start and then go to lunch or go home for the night. But whatever amount of time it takes is how much time it takes. Just wait for it. Don't try to encourage it. All right, so let's see what it found. For the city column and domain mapping, it found 11 new cities. 3 of them were unique, and all of them were valid. They're all valid because I haven't set up any rules to say what is and what isn't valid. Same thing with store type. But in my state, it found 5 unique and 11 were valid. So 11 records altogether, 5 of them were unique, none of them were new, and 11 were valid. Wait a minute, how can that be? We looked at that spreadsheet and we saw that at least 2 of them were not valid. 2 of them were abbreviations. How can they be valid? Well, because I have a rule that defines what to do with state abbreviations, it just corrected them for me, and now they're valid. That's all there is to it. So to go see the actual information here, let's click Next, go to the next page, and we can see for each of my domains what we're looking at. For city, we've got 3 unique values, Los Angeles, New York, and Seattle. The frequency that each of those unique values were, and what they would be corrected to, but they're not going to be corrected to anything because I haven't set that up. Same thing with store type here. We've got resale, retail, whale sale, and wholesale. It's not correcting it to anything because it doesn't know. But state, on the other hand, it doesn't have any, but I'm going to clear this because it's right now it's showing only the new ones that it never knew about. I'll click that, and now it's showing me all the possibles. If I come down to California here, these are the ones that it found. It found 1 California, or one CA, and it was corrected to California, and 2 Californias that were correct in the first place. Now let's take a look at store type because we want to make some changes. So we've got resale and retail, and we want them to convert. In other words, I don't want both. I want all my resales to be corrected to retails. So I'm going to select the 2 of them by clicking one of them and doing a control click, right click, and set them as synonyms, or I could do that over here on this bar either way. I'm going to set them as synonyms. But guess what? It got it wrong. It's going to correct retail to resale. I want the exact opposite. So I'm going to right click on retail and set it as leading. And now it's going to correct all my resales to retail. Now down here, I've got whale sale and wholesale. I'm going to do the same thing, but this time I'm going to select whale sale first and then control click wholesale, set them as synonyms. Okay. And once again, it's correcting my wholesales to whale sales. So I want to delete or remove those and not make them as synonyms anymore. How do I do that? Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll just come here and do the same thing, set what wholesale is leading. What I wanted to show you was the order in which you click these makes a difference. Not a much of a difference, because if you get it wrong, you can always right-click the right one and set it to reset as leading. So basically now we've got anything that's whale sale will be corrected to wholesale, and anything that's resale will be corrected to retail. All right, so let's finish that. No, I'm not ready to publish it yet. Okay, now let's come back to our knowledge base. We're still working in knowledge base management. We're not ready to run a project yet. I'll come over here and we're going to do domain management. We're going to come back to domain management. And these two, knowledge discovery and domain management, become very iterative. You do one, then do the other, then go back, then go forward and back and forward. You'll end up doing that at first a lot of times. You'll spend hours doing this. And then you'll find that when it's not really learning anything new, and then you may come back and do this every once in a while, every couple of months or something like that, just to look for any new trends. But after that, it's kind of pretty much learned everything it needs to learn. So as I said earlier, it's an initial investment in time, and then after that, it's pretty straightforward. So let's go back and do domain management. We're going to do one thing here. We're going to look at store type, domain, and we're going to look at the domain values. And notice we've got resale to retail and wholesale to wholesale. Well, I know that in my real data, this was just sample data, but I know that in my real data, I'm going to run into reseller quite often. I know a lot of the store types are listed as reseller. So I'm just going to proactively add that. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to add a domain value, and I'm going to name it reseller because that's what shows up in my data quite often. And then I'm going to simply, once again, select these and set them as synonyms. And now both reseller and resale will be corrected to retail. And again, you can go on and do all of this that you want to. All right, so that's it. We'll just do that one. I'm finished, and now I am ready to publish. So I'm going to publish. It's going to take it a second to do that. In the meantime, any questions? And now we're going to create a project to cleanse our data. It's pretty straightforward, and I'll show you how to do this in just a second. But you're going to select a knowledge base. You're going to create a project. You're going to tell it that it's a data cleansing project because we haven't gotten to data matching yet. We'll map our columns to our domains just like we've already done. This time, though, instead of knowledge discovery, we're going to be actually running this. So we'll point to our real data and we'll let it run, and we'll take a look at what suggestions it made, the corrections it's supposed to make. And then if we accept, we can either approve or reject those corrections, and then we export it. And in our case, we're going to export it to a spreadsheet, and that spreadsheet is going to become our stage for our warehouse. The cleansed data for every domain, or excuse me, every column in my source data that I map is going to have 5 columns output. Output column, so if it's city, it would say city _ output would be the name of the column. And it is the data that is going to be used, the cleansed value. The source is the value it was originally. If no cleansing takes place, these two will be the same. The reason, what made us think, what caused us to cleanse this data or make changes? A percentage of confidence, I am 92% confident or whatever. And the status, either it was originally correct the way it was or it's been corrected. So we're going to create this cleansing project. So now we're done with knowledge base management. We're going to come over here and create a new data quality project. We'll call it demo cleansing. We're going to use the knowledge base we've been working with, and this is just informational. These are the domains we've got. Notice down here, matching is grayed out. We haven't created any rules for matching yet. So the only thing we can do is cleansing. So we'll click next. All right, so where's our data source? This time we're going to go after our real data, so we're going to use SQL Server, and we're going to choose the database demo DW. Now, I'm sorry, not demo DW, demo DQS. Now, how did it know the list of databases? Well, remember when we opened up this utility, we told it which server. So it just simply went to master on that server and queried sys.databases, and that produced this list. Okay, we're going to use this database demo DQS. Let me just quickly show you that database to you. So the only table in here is dvo.stores. If I select from it, it's the same format as that spreadsheet. That's where we got that spreadsheet. But there are some interesting things in here. Right? Some of the things we've already seen, you know, WA instead of Washington, etc. We've got wholesale sale in here right there. We've got store ONE, and we've got store 16 also spelled out. And we've got one store which is in the city of New York, which I'm pretty sure is wrong. All right, so there's our database. Which table? The only one we have is stores. And now I'm going to map columns. Now in this case, we're going to map more columns. So I'm going to map city and state and store type. And we'll match those. And I'll click next. And again, same thing with this start button. Click it and then be patient and wait. Once it's done, you see the restart, and we see again a quick overview. Cities, we had 0 that were corrected, 1 that was suggested. Because I never set any rules for city, that one that's New York, it thinks it ought to be New York, but it's not going to correct it for me automatically. It's just going to suggest that it be correct. For our state, it's found 4 that it's going to correct. And for our store type, it found 5 that it's going to correct based upon the rules I've set. Let's go look at what those are. So for city, sure enough, there's my New York. It had a feeling that should be New York. It's 74% confident, and it's asking me to either approve or reject that change. I think I'll approve that one. As soon as I click approve, notice it's no longer suggested, it's now corrected. And then there were 3 others that were already fine. Now, when I say 3 others, I'm talking about 3 unique ones. Each one of them had multiple records, but 3 unique ones that were fine. For state, it found nothing to suggest, but it found 2 that were corrected, CA to California and WA to Washington, and 3 unique ones that were already correct. Store type, same kind of thing. We've got 3 that were corrected, resale and reseller to retail, and my wholesale was corrected to wholesale, and 2 unique ones that were already correct. So we're good. We found all of the changes that it has either suggested or automatically corrected, either way. And notice I can always reject any one of these. I'll click next, and now it's ready to export this data. Take a look at this data. Notice that store ID and store name, store ID, store ID, store name, street address, all those kinds of things. It only has the output because I didn't map those domains to, or those columns to any domains. But for city, notice it has 5 columns. City source, that was what it originally was. City output, this is what it's going to be corrected to. So if I find my New York down here somewhere right there, it's going to be corrected to New York. The reason, the rest of them were all just the original domain values. This one was a cleansing, and it was 73.8% confident in. It's corrected as opposed to the rest of them that are correct. And then we repeat that with state and then store type, etc. So this is the output. Now, I can choose to output all of that, the data and the cleansing info, or just the data. It will just put out the source, or the outputs rather. And now I've got to say, where am I going to put it to? I'm going to put it to a spreadsheet. I'll put it here in mod 9, and I'll call it cleansed stores. And now an easy mistake to make, I do this all the time, is click finish. But it hasn't really written that spreadsheet yet. You've got to click the export button first. Then it does that, and now you can finish. Now let's go take a look at that spreadsheet. So there's cleansed stores. And notice I'm not getting the 5 columns for every column thing. I'm just getting the corrected output. And so my New York is now changed to New York. My CAs are changed to Californias. My wholesales changed to a wholesale. All of that good stuff. Okay, then how do I do that in SSIS? Let's create a new package. So I'll create a new project. We'll call it Demo DQS. Oops, sorry, beg your pardon, I did an analysis project. Let's close that. Start this over again and choose Integration Services Project. That looks better. I'll take a look at my package. I'm going to add a data flow to it. I'll go into the data flow and I'm going to add the DQS task. I always have a hard time finding this. I don't know why. I think it's because in my own copy that I work with, I put it up at the top and then I can never find it here in the default. There it is, DQS cleansing. Now I'm going to also add a destination. And we'll just write this out to a flat file. Okay, so let's look at our DQS transformation. Oh, we need a source. So let's add a source. We'll add a SQL Server source. We'll create a new connection manager for MIA-SQL. We'll use the demo DQS database. Test it. Working well. Then we'll connect that up to my DQS cleansing transformation and open this up. And notice what it says. During validation, the component detected a potential metadata discrepancy. The data types of the input columns are not supported. Don't worry about that. You'll see that quite often, so just don't worry about it. In my case, it was because I forgot to choose the store or the table. But if you see that normally when you open this up and you see that thing about a data type, 99% of the time you don't need to worry about it. Okay, now we need to create a connection to our knowledge base. I don't have one, so I'll create another connection manager. All it really needs is the name of the server that DQS is running on. And then the name of my knowledge base. Remember, we have 2, the one that we originally had that we built this on, and then the one we created, Demo KB. And it shows me all of my domains. And now I do mapping, just like I did before. So I'm going to choose city, state, and store type, and I will map them to my domains, city, state, and store type. And of course you can go in and do all of them that you want. And notice this is just like in the client that I just showed you, the outputs. You can rename the outputs if you want to, whatever. I'll click OK. And now I'm going to write this out to a flat file, create a connection manager. We're going to use delimited. I almost always do. And we'll call this cleansed stores SSIS CM for connection manager. And I'll browse, I'll find a file, or I won't find a file, I'll have it create a file. I'm going to differentiate, I'm going to call this cleansed by SSIS. And we're going to make it a CSV file. We're going to put the column names in the first data row. We're going to use it's delimited. We want this to be comma delimited. I can preview the data, but again, I'm probably not going to see anything in here except the column names. I'm good. I'll check my mappings to make sure they look right. They do. Click OK. I'm ready to go. And now let's execute this. It's reading from my source, doing the cleansing, so the same thing that we did in that utility, and then it's going to write to a CSV file. So it found 22 rows, exported 22 rows. In the real world, of course, we wouldn't forget to put an output here for errors, but we happen to know there weren't going to be any, so we're just kind of going through this quickly. And now I can look at my CSV file cleansed by SSIS. I'm going to get the exact same thing. The only difference is with this, I chose to have all the aliases put in, whereas in the other spreadsheet, I said just export the actual data. And that's how you do it with an SSIS transform. So one more thing to talk about here, and that is deduplication, in other words, matching data. So finding two records that are matching. Unlikely that they'll both be in the same database or same source data, but we might be reading data from lots of sources. And you know, my CRM project has an entry for Ben Smith, and so does my order processing system. How do I figure out that if I just want an output for customers, how do I figure out that these two are duplicate, and how do I figure out which one I want to keep? So that is a matching policy. So we're going to look at using DQS to do deduplication or matching. So the first thing you need to do when you're creating a policy for matching is define rules that tell you what constitutes a match. Now, it's funny because if I gave you a list of records or two lists of records and asked you to do it, it would be very easy as a human being for you to figure out which one's matched. Or, you know, even if there were some complications, you could always get most of them and then come to somebody who knew what they were talking about and say, hey, are these two matched records? You know, is this Ben Smith the same as that Ben Smith? Kind of a thing. But as a human being, you could figure that out mostly on your own. Computer has a really hard time. In fact, a computer can't do that. We have to define rules that will constitute two records being matches of each other, or 10 records all being matches. They might be not just two duplicates, but lots of duplicates. So we're going to create rules, and the rules basically say for each domain what constitutes that these records match. And for each domain, we're going to have a similarity, three settings, a similarity. The similarity is going to say if the two are similar, they're a duplicate, or we can set it to exact. In other words, if they're not exactly the same, they're not duplicates. Think Social Security number field. If the two aren't exactly the same, they're not the same person. But think name for similar. Think Rob Johnson and Robert Johnson and Bob Johnson and Bobby Johnson. They're all similar, they're not exact, but there's a good chance those are all the same person. So we're going to first of all say, does this have to be an exact match or can it just be similar? Second thing, we're going to assign a weight to this rule, to this component of the rule. So we're going to say if the match succeeds, if it finds that it does match, how much weight do we give to this in the overall picture? Now the weights for all of your components have to add up to 100. So I might say, this one, you know, I want to analyze it, but it doesn't, there's a lot of correlations that could be false, so I'm going to set it to a weight of 5. But the phone number, it's very unlikely that two records that have the same phone number are really two records. So I'm going to set that at 40%. And so you just give weights to how credible each of these things are for determining a duplicate. And then finally, you can set a prerequisite, meaning if these two don't match, they're not duplicates, period. The only way that these two records can match is if these two are duplicated. Otherwise, they're absolutely not a match. So you can set that to prerequisite or not. Then as it runs through, it's going to look at these rules that you set up for each domain, analyze all those domains, come up with the records, and it's going to say, add up all the weights from this portion right here. So add up all the weights, and compare that to what we set as a matching score. So the default matching score would be 80%, meaning if the combined set of these rules adds up to 80 or more, the two records are considered duplicates. If it's not 80%, it's less than that, they're not duplicates. And you can set this value, the matching score value, to be whatever you want. Then you create a matching project very much like we did our data cleansing project. You'll determine the knowledge base, you'll map the things, and then you'll review the match clusters. A match cluster is, we're talking about records duplicated as if there were only two, but there might be a dozen records that it found were duplicates. That would be one cluster, a cluster of records that seem to match. And then you're going to export the ones you want. And there are two kinds of records now. There are matches, that is all of the records in the cluster, and there are survivors, the one that you want to use. So out of those, all the records in the cluster, I'm going to choose one of them to be the survivor, the one that gets actually exported. And you can define survivorship rules, or actually I should say you can't define them. You can choose from these four possible survivorship rules. You can say that the surviving record is determined to be the one that is longest. It has the most number of bytes in it. Or the one that is most complete, the one that has the most number of fields in it. Or the combination, most complete and longest. So if several records have the same number of fields completed, which one has the most number of bytes, kind of a thing. Or you can use pivot record. Pivot record, I don't know how to explain other than to say SQL Server itself makes a choice. And to be perfectly honest with you, pivot record almost always is correct in my opinion. When I've looked through them, these other things may or may not be right, but pivot record has the highest level of agreeing with me. And of course, if you agree with me, you're right. That's the way it goes. So pivot record almost always picks the one surviving record that I would have picked. So you can use whatever you want, but those are your options. The results, just like our cleansed output had multiple columns, so does our matched output. A cluster ID is a unique identifier for the cluster of records, though all those records that kind of seem to duplicate each other. Record ID is a unique identifier for each record. The matching rule is the name of the rule that said these are matches. The score was that combined weight that it used to compare against what was by default anyway, 80%. And then pivot mark is a mark that's set for the record that it thinks is best. It pivots there. I don't know why they call it pivot. It has nothing to do with a pivot table or anything like that. Okay, so let's take a look at doing this. It seems to make a lot more sense when you're actually doing it compared to when you're talking about it. So once again, let's go into our DQS client. We're already connected to the database. And now we're going to come back and do more knowledge base management because we need to create those rules. So now under our knowledge base, we're going to do a matching policy. We're going to create some rules. We're going to use for our learning data that same spreadsheet, that original one called stores.xls. Make sure we're on the right worksheet. And we're going to map our columns to our domains just like before. So we're going to get city, we're going to get state, we're going to get store type, but we're also going to get some more. We're going to get most of the rest of these. We're going to get phone number, and we're going to get store name. And now we've run out of mappings. I need to add another one, so I'll just come up here and add a mapping, and we're going to choose store ID. Or actually, you know what, let's choose street address. Now, when I map these first three, the domains already exist, so they're pretty straightforward. When I get to the other ones, I don't have domains, so I'm going to have to create them. So I'll create a phone number. I'll create a store name, and I'll create an address. So now I've taken all the columns. The only one I don't have in here is store ID. We'll just leave that one alone. We've added the rest of these. And so now we're ready to go. So we'll click next, and now we're ready to create a rule. There aren't any rules at all so far. So we're going to come over here and create a matching rule. So here's our read rules detail. The name of the rule, let's call it is same store. Title, description. The matching score, like I said, the default is 80%. You can set it to whatever you want. And then here are the individual rules. So we're going to add one. We're going to use store name. We're going to say it needs to be similar, not exact. And we're going to give this a weight of 20. It's not a prerequisite, so we're good. Let's add another one. We're going to add street address. Again, this one we're going to make exact, and we'll make it 20%. In other words, if I have two stores that are on similar streets but not exact same streets, they're not the same. City, again, we're going to make the city be exact, and we'll add it as 20%. Now, here's where this user interface starts to kind of fall apart, to be honest with you. I'm not wild about the user interface they've got here. You kind of have to remember, I've got store name, street address, and city, and so far I have a weight of 60. Because when I add my next one, it gets kind of wanky to figure out. We're going to do phone number. And we're going to say that phone numbers need to be exact. And we're going to set this at 30%. So now we're at 90%. We'll add one more. We'll add store type. And I clicked it, but where'd it go? Well, you have to kind of scroll around. I'll choose store type. And the store type does not need to be the same. It's similar. And we're going to set it at 10%. So now we're at 100%. But I'm going to add one more. I'm going to do state. It has to be exact. It has 0%, but it's a prerequisite. If they're not in the same state, they're not the same store. I don't give it any weight. Usually I don't with prerequisites because it's a yes or no kind of thing. So now we've added up to 100. And by the way, if you didn't, let me just change this one real quickly. You get this message. Domain weight must be 100. So it tells you right away if you've got it wrong. We're going to set it to 80% as our matching score, and then we'll just let it go. Once again, be patient. Just sit and wait for it to run. Okay, these are the clusters it found, store 1 and store ONE. The matching score, the score for this thing was 92%. State was exactly the same, phone number was the same, store type, city, address, everything was the same. Why it doesn't find 100%, I'm not sure, but that's what it found. It found those two as matching. So we'll click next, and now we can rerun this. Okay, so I can click start again if I want to and have this rerun. It's really going to find the same things, but now I can take a look at the rules that were used. I can look at the results in kind of a chart format. I can look at the profiler and see all of my records and see what duplicates there were. So I'm finished with this. So what I'm publishing now is the project itself, or excuse me, the knowledge base, the rules is what I'm trying to say. Next, we're going to create a project. So we'll create a new quality project, and we'll call this demo matching. Same knowledge base, and now notice matching is not grayed out. This time we'll use our store's database table, and we'll set up our mappings again. City, phone number, state, store name, store type. We'll add another mapping for street address, and we'll map them to the domains we've already created. At this point, it really doesn't make any difference what order these are in, at least not to DQS. You may care for your output purposes, but for DQS, it doesn't matter what order these are in. So we'll have this run. Now this is going against our live data, our actual data. Now in this case, it found two clusters, the store 1 and ONE spelled out, and store 16 and it spelled out. So it found two clusters. Each record, you notice, has its own ID number, and we can take a look at this. We're looking at an 80% as our matching score. It's found these two that match according to that. So now we're ready to export this data. So I can export it. I'm going to export it to a spreadsheet. And I have two things, the matching results and the surviving results. The matching results has all of those records in it. And I'm going to send that out to, we'll call this matched stores. But surviving stores is the one I really am going to use as my source for staging. And now I have to choose which one, what survivorship rule I want to use. I usually use pivot record, but you can use what you want. And now I'm going to click export, which will create these two spreadsheets. I'll finish this off. And then we'll go take a look at those spreadsheets. So my matched stores lists all the clusters. So store ONE and store 1 are still there. Store 16 and store 16 are all there. Notice what we've got, the status, the pivot record, and my cluster ID, and my individual record ID, the rule that was used, the score that it found, and the pivot mark. This one was the pivot, this one was the pivot. It, as best I can tell, it looks at the other records for the way it did it, and it found that the other records all had numbers instead of spelled out, and so it chose the one that matched that and conformed to that. Is the best way I know that to figure out how a pivot works, but it really does work amazingly well. Now, let's open that other one. Okay, it's not that new. It's been around forever. I just don't change very well. Let's look at my surviving stores. Same thing, except it didn't list the clusters. It didn't list the stores that didn't match, just the ones that survived. And that's how you do data cleansing, duplication, and all of that through DQS.